They called her the Black Lady because no one could agree on anything else. Not her country, not her bureau, not the language that formed her first lie. Some said she'd been born to diplomats. Others swore she came from an alley near a shuttered factory. She wore her reputation like a coat. Well-tailored, weatherproof, and impossible to read. Berlin, winter of 1963. A city stitched together with wires and suspicion. Snow fell in powders and clumps, deadening the sound of tires along Friedrichstrasse and making every footstep sound deliberate. In the west, cafes breathed smoke and jazz. In the east, clocks ticked in office corridors like metronomes for discipline. The wall ran between them like a scar with a heartbeat. She arrived in the guise of a countess returning from Vienna. A pale hat, a sable collar from another woman's life, and a cigarette holder thin as a conductor's baton. The passport said Contessa R., elegant script, and a watermark that would satisfy an inspector who wanted to be satisfied. In the cab from Tempelhof, she traced a gloved finger over the window fog and wrote nothing at all. Her mission, like most valuable things, had been divided into smaller parts. The whole, if assembled, would be a single truth too large to carry. A list of listening posts, frequencies, and schedules, corroborated by a man who had given her a different name each time they met. The piece she had tonight was simple in concept and awkward in practice. A cylinder of lipstick, the color of arterial blood. Inside its wax, hidden along a spiral groove, invisible in ordinary light, ran a ribbon of microfilm. Heat would release it cleanly. Fire was both the key and the threat. She kept the tube in a velvet case with others, each a decoy. She kept decoys for the decoys. Paranoia wasn't a mood, it was a vocabulary. The drop would be at Café Mandel, not far from the border. Its windows were frosted with patterns that made every observer seem dissolved. Its tables close enough for chair legs to scrape like signals. She arrived late enough to suggest confidence, early enough to choose the table that allowed a view of the door and the mirror. She ordered a Turkish coffee and let the sugar stand untasted. The cup was heavy, the kind used to outlast regimes. 2 men sat at the bar, not speaking, their shoulders unconsciously squared toward the room. West. They had the American way of pretending to be casual and the CIA habit of overpaying for small rituals. Across the room, near the radiator, a woman in a floral dress tapped her spoon with a rhythm that didn't match the music. 3 fast, 2 slow, 3 fast. Not the signal, just nerves. The pianist, an old man in a sweater vest and the last illusions of hair, played Autumn Leaves as if every falling note were being inventoried by a committee. Her contact would be a baker's boy, she'd been told. A teenager with flower-mottled shoes. The lipstick case was to pass to him inside the paper bag of a loaf of bread. Unconventional, they'd said. Ridiculous, she'd thought. But ordinary objects made the best accomplices when the extraordinary failed. The boy arrived, late and breathless, the bag tucked under his arm like contraband sport. He set it on her table without looking at her and said, too loudly, "From your usual, gnädige Frau." "Very kind," she replied, voice sliding from Vienna to Potsdam like a blade past silk. She nudged the velvet case into the bag, pressing it deep into the warm, seeded heart of the loaf. Rye. She could smell caraway and heat and the city's cheap coal. The scrape of a chair against the tile lifted the hair at the nape of her neck. Over her shoulder, one of the Americans stood, turned, sat again. A tell. He wanted to move, but had been told not to. Near the coat rack, a man in a gray suit read a newspaper without moving his eyes. Stasi. She recognized the inflexible way he held his jaw, as if he'd been born chewing orders. She folded the top of the paper bag like a housewife might, soft and neat, and smiled at the boy. He didn't smile back. Good. He left with a shuffle of feet that sounded like guilt. She lit a cigarette, watched the smoke curl and thicken and disappear into the cafe's collective haze. The mirror showed a collage. Her hat, a piece of the door, the pianist's hands, the faces of men trying not to be faces. On the street, she shed the Countess as she walked, garments becoming a sequence of exits. 2 blocks away, she slipped into a doorway, replaced the fur with a coarse scarf, nudged the hat into a satchel lined with a soldier's blanket, removed a pearl earring, and left it on a windowsill where no one would find it until they replaced the window. When she stepped back into the U-Bahn, she was a maid on a 10-minute break. Uniform, plain and practical. A metal lunch tin tucked against her stomach. It smelled faintly of polish. That made her smile. In the train car, a trio of factory workers joked in Slovak, while a man in a brown overcoat studied the advertisement above her head with the intensity of a confession. The tunnels shouted, then swallowed sound. The train's clatter syncing with the clock inside her. She got off at Stadtmitte and let herself be carried by a corridor's tide of gray coats. When she reached the public washroom, she entered the last stall, locked it, and tapped the radiator 3 times. Pause. 2 times. Pause. 3 times. The answer came. 1, 1, 1. A cheap echo. Not the code. No one to meet. Good. It meant the planned interception had moved, or the watchers had gotten bored, which meant they were planning not to be bored. She took from the lunch tin a compact of face powder, its mirror clouded by 1,000 quick looks. Under the puff, beneath a false bottom, lay a sliver of onion skin paper, text handwritten in music. At first, the measures appeared as childish scribbles, 4 bars of something like a lullaby. But each rest stood in for a number, each accident for a letter. She memorized the sequence in the time it took to inhale, exhale, inhale again. Then she folded the fragment into the seam of her hem, stitched it with 2 blind passes of thread pulled from her sleeve lining, and flushed the powder puff for theater. Somewhere a pipe groaned. When she emerged, the man in the brown overcoat had repositioned himself near the exit stairs. East. Unsmiling. Efficient in the way men were when they believed in systems. She tilted her head and became small, became forgettable, became the kind of woman who could be searched and dismissed without breaking the day's schedule. He let her pass. She could feel his imagination fill in details about her life she did not have to invent. The second disguise took shape in a stairwell that smelled of iron and cigarettes. She unpinned her hair, rolled it under a cap, tugged on a woolen coat with sergeant stripes cut off long ago. The face in the shadow became masculine enough to blur. When she stepped back into the light, she wore a soldier's short, purposeful stride. Nobody meets a soldier's eyes for long. It's a cultural reflex, and culture is as reliable as code. Checkpoint Friedrichstrasse was a throat that swallowed people whole. The line shivered forward in increments dictated by boredom on one side and procedure on the other. Behind her, the American from the cafe had joined the queue. Ahead, the Stasi man with the gray suit pretended to be a clerk with a stamp. Her passport now was a drab booklet secured with 3 staples that hadn't been there yesterday. She held it so the photo kissed the light. The clerk frowned. His eyes settled on the corner of her mouth, where a smear of red remained. The Countess's lipstick, worn thin into the maid's mouth. A detail, a rope threaded through 3 lives. He reached for the drawer where questions were kept. "Name," he said. "Sergeant K," she answered. Gravel rolled into the syllables. "Transfer from Rostock, orders to report to the commissary." She slid across a paper stamped with a thought she'd had last month and a signature she'd borrowed in Warsaw. The clerk's stamp hovered. Uncertain. The American in line behind her made a mistake. He put his hand in his coat pocket quickly. Someone stepped on his heel. The American turned and muttered in English. Reflex, untrained. The clerk's attention pivoted. 2 guards looked up together like dogs hearing a distant whistle. The line changed its temperature. The black lady coughed, a real tickle in her throat from cold air. She coughed again and let her knee buckle. Bodies adjusted to accommodate collapses. It was a form of courtesy, even in suspicious times. In the confusion, she stepped past the painted line by half a foot. The clerk noticed only her deference as she stepped back, apologizing with a narrow smile. He hated being delayed. He stamped. She did not exhale until the air had different politics. Night laid down faster on the eastern side. She crossed to a side street where the snow had turned to granular black sand and ducked into a tenement whose entryway smelled of cabbage and old water. The 4th floor door opened after she knocked. 2, 2, 1, 2, and she entered a room where a metronome ticked without a pianist. The woman who owned the room and the metronome wore a cardigan and grief. "Did he get it?" the woman whispered. "The boy?" The black lady shook snow from her coat. "He got a loaf of bread warm enough to feel like a secret." "He'll be fine." The woman nodded without hearing. She pointed to a table. On it, a map of communications nodes had been inked with crosses. Some had been circled, some smudged. In a shallow dish, a candle's flame worried the air. The black lady set the compact beside it and held the lipstick in her palm, not yet offering it. 2 hours, the woman said. Then we transmit. 40 minutes, the black lady countered. At 1, the watchers change. Will be the noise between 2 systems. The woman stared at the lipstick. Is it all inside that? It is what you were promised, she said, which was the most honest sentence she'd spoken all day. Footsteps on the stair climbed 3 floors, paused, retreated, returned, the scrape of a chair below, a cough that tried to sound like a wall settling. She moved to the door and placed her ear against the seam. The metronome ticked, not quite steady now. She reached into the lipstick case, turned the base. The bullet rose with the melancholy grace of a column being erected. She held it over the flame until the wax softened. The scent of perfume became chemical. The spiral of microfilm shone, then sagged, then slid free like a snake shedding itself. She twined it around a knitting needle and pinned it under the heel of her shoe, where no pat-down would find it unless the interrogator had imagination. Few did. Systems discouraged it. The door handle jiggled. A voice announced something about ration forms. Stasi. The cadence gave it away. She tucked the empty lipstick back into its case and placed the case in a teacup on the table. Ordinary objects, reordered. When the door opened, the woman's grief transformed into a kind of martyrdom. We are 2 neighbors, she told the officer in practical German. We are reliving better music with a metronome. The officer stepped in, least polite foot first. He sniffed the air and found only the memory of perfume and wax and tea. He looked at the metronome, frowned at its impertinent ticking, and stopped it with a finger. Silence expanded, then pressed in. He examined the room. He examined the two women. He examined his own reflection in the window and disliked the person he saw. His gaze settled on the black lady's shoes. "Off," he said. She unbuckled them with the slowness of obedience. Inside her skull, a small clock began to tremble. The officer bent, patted the shoes, patted her ankles, patted the idea of her. He handed the shoes back and left them unexamined a centimeter from the heel. He wasn't imaginative. She loved him a little for that, and hated him for the same reason. "Transmit nothing tonight," he said finally, as if he had granted a favor. He left a smell like old pennies. When the door closed, she breathed. The woman slumped against the wall and slid down it, as if gravity had been added to the room. The metronome lay silent and accusatory. The black lady replaced her shoes and stood with new weight. 40 minutes, she repeated softly. "We'll walk to the roof, we'll string the line, we'll sing the numbers." "You're sure?" the woman asked, eyes wide with the terrible hope of those who have already decided. "I am sure we have 40 minutes, she said. It was the truest measure available. They completed the transmission at 1:12, sending the sequence she had memorized, which might activate a network or dismantle one. She never asked what songs did to the people who heard them. Music travels and blames the composer later. At dawn, she wore her third disguise, a diplomat's aide with a stiff folder, a badge that opened doors, and the weary posture of someone who lived on coffee and policy. She crossed a courtyard where sparrows pecked at iced bread and paused to adjust her glove as a car idled, and a second car idled, and a third did not idle at all. Men watched her with the vigilance of men who wished to be thanked. She offered them nothing, not even the satisfaction of fear. By noon, the message had been received by someone who would swear never to have known her. By evening, something somewhere had gone very quiet. In a gray basement, a radio operator smoked his last cigarette. In a white office, an American typed a memo with knuckles as pale as his shirt. In a black car, a man smiled as if his teeth might be evidence. Two services marked their maps and whispered new words into old telephones. She removed the diplomat's badge in a bathroom, where the window opened onto a courtyard, and the courtyard opened onto a street with no name that anyone used. She replaced it with nothing at all. The city didn't need more names. Was she theirs? Theirs? Her own? The dossier compiled by those who pursued her noted that she had once saved a young East German lieutenant from a sweep by pointing in the wrong direction at the right time. It also recorded that she had, on a different night, handed an American a list of Soviet frequencies that contained 3 accurate entries and one designed to explode a transmitter. The records could not agree which was the truth and which the disguise. On the bridge at dusk, snow turned to rain and back again. She paused, felt the microfilm's absence in her shoe like a phantom limb, and smiled. Somewhere someone tried to fit her into a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. She lit a cigarette and let the smoke right in the air. Behind her, footsteps approached, then faded. Ahead, a clock in a church tower ticked until it tolled. The sound carried across both sides of a city that had separated its own heartbeat. She walked on, her coat shedding the weather and the day's names. Another ordinary figure in a city made of disguises, carrying nothing that mattered anymore, unless she did. And if a listener insists on choosing, on deciding that the Black Lady belongs to a bureau with an acronym and a hymn, let them. The story will hold the shape of their certainty for a moment before it changes again. That's what good disguises do. That's what good messages do. That's what she does.